The royal palace, with its towering walls and intricate gates, always seemed like a place full of power and authority. The royal guards stood tall in their uniforms, their faces stern and unyielding, their eyes fixed straight ahead. To most people, they were simply symbols of the kingdom's strength, distant and untouchable. The public saw them as almost statues, standing motionless for hours, always following orders without showing any emotion. But few people knew that behind those rigid facades, there was a deeper story, one that was full of quiet moments and random acts of kindness. Every day, the royal guard stood at attention outside the palace, their eyes scanning the crowd, making sure that everything was in order. Visitors came and went, admiring the grand building and snapping photos, but rarely did they think about the people who stood watch over it. The guards were trained to be disciplined, to give nothing away. They were the first line of defense, the symbols of strength and unity. But when the crowd was gone, and the palace was silent, that was when the true character of these men and women began to show. One such day, a small elderly woman walked past the gates of the palace. She was struggling with her heavy shopping bags, her steps slow and unsure. The guards, ever watchful, noticed her from a distance. They had seen many people walk by, but something about her seemed different. As the woman struggled to carry her bags, one of the guards, tall and imposing in his uniform, decided to do something unexpected. He stepped forward, his boots making the soft sound on the cobblestone path. The woman looked up in surprise, unsure what to expect. The guard, his face softening just slightly, bent down and took the bags from her hands. "Let me help you," he said in a voice much gentler than she had imagined. The woman, taken aback, smiled gratefully, feeling an unexpected warmth in her heart. She had never thought she would receive such kindness from a royal guard, someone she had always imagined as distant and cold. As he carried her bags, they exchanged a few words. The guard asked her where she was heading, and the woman shared stories of her life, the little things that made her day brighter. It wasn't much, but for that moment, it felt as though the world was a little smaller, a little more connected. The guard didn't need to do this. His job didn't require him to help strangers with their groceries. He could have easily ignored the woman, just as many people did in the hustle and bustle of city life. But he chose to show kindness, even in the smallest way, because that's what made him feel human. It wasn't the uniform that defined him, but the respect he had for others, especially those who might be overlooked in a busy world. As the woman thanked him and continued on her way, the guard returned to his post, his face once again set in its usual expression. But something had changed. He knew that, for just a few minutes, he had made a difference in someone's life. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor was it recognized by anyone but the two of them. But it was a moment of respect, a moment of heart, and it was this, more than any formal duty, that made the royal guard's job meaningful. And so, life at the palace went on, with the guards standing as stoic figures in their uniforms. But every now and then, a quiet act of kindness would remind the world that even in places of great authority, humanity still found a way to shine through. The next day, the story of the royal guard helping the elderly woman spread quickly through the community. People couldn't stop talking about it. They had always seen the guards as emotionless figures, trained to be perfect soldiers, always stoic and distant. But here was proof that beneath their tough exterior, there was kindness, warmth, and humanity. As people walked past the palace gates, they began to look at the guards differently. No longer were they just symbols of strength and power. Instead, they were seen as people who understood the importance of showing respect and care for others. It wasn't about their uniform or their rigid posture. It was about their actions, the quiet moments that revealed who they truly were. One morning, a young man approached the palace gates, carrying a heavy load of books in his arms. He was struggling, trying to balance the pile while also trying to open the gate. His hands were full, and he looked frustrated, unsure of how to manage. As he struggled, One of the royal guards, standing at attention as usual, noticed him from a distance. Without a second thought, the guard stepped forward, his boots echoing softly against the stone walkway. "Can I help you with those?" the guard asked in a calm, gentle voice. The young man, surprised by the offer, hesitated at first. He had never imagined a royal guard offering to help him. He had always seen them as figures of authority, not as people willing to lend a hand. Sure," the young man said, relieved. The guard carefully took the stack of books and smiled. "Don't worry about it," the guard said with a reassuring smile. "We're all just people, aren't we?" The young man smiled back, feeling an unexpected warmth from the guard's words. It was such a simple act, but it meant so much. The guard didn't need to offer his help. He could have easily ignored the young man and kept his distance, as many others might have. But instead, he chose to offer a helping hand, showing respect in a way that words couldn't express. As the guard walked alongside the young man, they talked for a few moments, exchanging pleasantries. The young man, still surprised, couldn't stop thinking about how different this encounter had been from what he had expected. In a world where people often kept to themselves, this simple act of kindness stood out as something truly special. When they reached the young man's destination, he thanked the guard, feeling a sense of gratitude that he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about the help with the books. It was about the respect shown to him in a way he hadn't anticipated. As the guard returned to his post, he resumed his duties, standing tall and still. His face returned to its usual stoic expression, but inside, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He knew that by offering his help, he had made someone's day a little easier. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of things, but it was moments like these that made the royal guards more than just their uniforms. They were people who truly cared, who understood the power of kindness, even in the smallest actions. The young man continued on his way, but he would never forget the kindness of the guard, and the simple yet profound lesson it taught him. That respect and kindness are often found in the most unexpected places. Behind the scenes at the royal palace, the life of a royal guard wasn't as simple as it appeared. To the public, their role was straightforward: stand still, remain alert, and protect the palace. But in truth, there was much more to their job than what met the eye. When the crowds had dispersed and the royal ceremonies were over, the guards had moments of quiet reflection, where the weight of their duty would settle in. One evening, after another long day of standing guard, one of the royal guards, named William, sat down in the break room, removing his boots and stretching his legs. He sighed deeply, feeling the tiredness in his muscles. It wasn't just the physical strain of standing for hours that wore on him. It was the pressure of always having to appear perfect, of maintaining a stoic face and a disciplined attitude, no matter what. A fellow guard, John, walked in and noticed the tired look on William's face. He had been on duty with him that day, and he could tell something was on his mind. "Hey, you doing okay?" John asked, sitting down across from William. William looked up, a small smile forming on his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm good. Just tired, you know. It's a lot to take in sometimes, being the face everyone looks at. We're supposed to be these perfect soldiers, but we're only human." John nodded in understanding. "I get it. The job doesn't exactly leave room for mistakes, but we're allowed to have those moments too. We're allowed to be human." The word struck William deeply. It was true. While they wore the uniform of the royal guards and held positions of respect and authority, they were still people with emotions, hopes, and fears. Their stoic appearance was just that, an appearance. Beneath the surface, they felt the same things as anyone else. As they continued to talk, William shared more about how the pressure of always being on affected him. It wasn't easy to be seen as unfeeling, always keeping emotions in check, when inside, he had so much to offer. He wanted to connect with people, to show them that he was more than just a soldier. But every day, he had to suppress those feelings and put on a mask. John listened intently. "You know," he said, "it's moments like the ones we share with people that matter. Helping the elderly woman or carrying someone's books. It's those acts that remind us who we are, not just as guards, but as people who care." William smiled at his friend's words. He had always known deep down that the job wasn't just about standing still or following orders. It was about making a difference in small ways, offering a helping hand when needed, and showing respect in the simplest of gestures. The two guards sat there for a while, their conversation turning lighter as they shared stories of their own lives outside of the palace. They both had families, hobbies, and dreams, things they didn't often talk about while on duty. As William got up to return to his post, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had always believed in the importance of his role, but now he understood that it wasn't just about the uniform or the responsibility. It was about the people he interacted with, the quiet acts of kindness he offered, and the respect he showed to everyone around him. It was these moments, these connections, that truly defined who he was as a person. Walking back to his post, William stood a little taller, knowing that while he might always have to wear a mask on the outside, on the inside, he could remain true to himself. It was these quiet, heartwarming moments of humanity that made being a royal guard more than just a job. It made it a calling. One afternoon, during a grand event at the palace, a young child wandered near the gates, staring up at the royal guards with wide eyes. The child's parents were distracted by the ceremony taking place, and the little one, curious about the tall figures standing in their impressive uniforms, couldn't resist the urge to get closer. As the child approached, the guards, ever vigilant, noticed the small figure moving toward them. Most would have expected the guard to remain motionless and unapproachable, but today, something different happened. One of the guards, named Michael, saw the child's bright eyes and a sense of wonder that reminded him of the simplicity of youth. The child stopped a few feet away, looking up at Michael with an innocent curiosity. Michael bent down slightly, bringing himself to the child's level. With a warm smile, he said, "Hello there. What's your name?" The child hesitated for a moment, then said shyly, "Sophie." "Well, Sophie," Michael said gently, "do you know what I'm wearing today?" He gestured to his shiny, carefully maintained uniform. "This is a special outfit. It's made for big events like this. But more importantly, it's a reminder that I'm here to make sure everyone stays safe." Sophie's eyes grew even wider with interest. "Are you a superhero?" she asked with a giggle. Michael chuckled at her innocent question. "I wouldn't call myself a superhero," he said, "but I do try to help people in my own way. My job is to keep everyone safe, just like how a superhero helps protect others." Sophie looked up at him with admiration, as if she truly believed Michael was some kind of hero. For a moment, the grand ceremony around them seemed to fade, leaving only the simple exchange between a young child and a royal guard. As the child continued to ask him questions about his uniform, Michael patiently answered, giving her a glimpse into the world he lived in. He explained the significance of the guard's duties, the history of the palace, and even shared a small laugh with Sophie as she asked why his boots were so shiny. When it was time for the child to leave with her parents, she waved at Michael. "Thank you, Mr. Guard. You're like a superhero," she called out enthusiastically. Michael stood there for a moment, watching as Sophie disappeared into the crowd. Her words lingered in his mind. "You're like a superhero." It wasn't the first time someone had said something kind to him, but it was the first time he truly realized how much of an impact even a simple conversation could have. As the day continued, the event carrying on with its usual splendor, Michael returned to his post, resuming his watch over the palace grounds. But his heart felt lighter. He had made a small connection with someone, a reminder that beyond the uniform and the ceremony, there was still room for kindness and understanding. For Michael, moments like these were what truly made the job worthwhile. They weren't part of the official duties, nor were they recognized in the reports at the end of the day. But they were the moments that made being a royal guard more than just a job. They were the moments that made him feel like he was truly serving the people, not just by protecting them, but by showing them that respect and kindness existed even in the most formal of places, and that, in itself, was a kind of heroism. One quiet morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise over the royal palace, a royal guard named David was on his usual patrol around the palace grounds. The hustle and bustle of the city beyond the palace walls seemed far away, and the peace of the early hours made the palace feel even more serene. As David walked along the perimeter, something unusual caught his eye near the gate. A small, scruffy dog wandered into the courtyard. The dog looked lost and weary, its fur matted from days of roaming. It was clear that it had been through some rough times. David stopped in his tracks, observing the dog from a distance. He wasn't sure where the animal had come from or how it had gotten past the palace gates, but something about the dog's sad eyes tugged at his heart. For a moment, David hesitated. It wasn't part of his duty to take care of stray animals, and he could easily have called someone else to handle it. But as he watched the dog, curled up and shivering near the gates, David knew he couldn't just walk away. He had always believed that showing compassion was as important as following orders, even if it meant stepping outside the lines of his usual responsibilities. Slowly, he approached the dog, speaking softly to avoid startling it. "Hey there, little one," he murmured gently. The dog looked up at him with cautious eyes, but didn't run away. David knelt down and extended his hand slowly, giving the dog space to approach him if it wanted to. After a few moments, the dog cautiously trotted over and sniffed David's hand. It was clear that the dog had been through a lot, but was still open to kindness. David carefully scooped the dog into his arms, being mindful of its fragile state. He could feel the dog's ribs beneath its fur, a reminder of how desperately it needed help. His heart softened as he gently cradled the animal, whispering calming words to reassure it. He carried the dog to the nearby shelter, a small but well-kept facility near the palace grounds that cared for animals in need. David spoke with the shelter staff, explaining how he had found the dog wandering around. They quickly took the dog in, offering it food and a safe place to rest. David stayed with the staff for a few moments, ensuring the dog was comfortable before he left. As he walked back to his post, David felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't a grand or heroic act, but it had been the right thing to do. The dog was no longer alone and vulnerable. It had found help, and he had been the one to offer it. Later that day, as David resumed his duties, he couldn't help but think back to that moment. It wasn't about the Royal Guard uniform or the responsibilities that came with it. It was about the ability to show kindness, even in the smallest of ways. Helping that dog wasn't something he had to do. It wasn't in his job description. But it was a reminder that true respect and compassion often come when you least expect them, and in ways you don't always plan. David didn't need to be recognized for his actions. The joy of knowing he had helped was enough. It was a quiet reminder that, no matter how grand the world may seem, sometimes the most meaningful moments come from acts of care and respect, no matter how small they might appear. And that, for David, was the true essence of being a royal guard. It was during one of the most important events of the year at the palace when a situation unfolded that no one could have predicted. The grand hall was filled with visitors from all over, and the royal family had invited dignitaries to celebrate a historic occasion. The royal guards stood at their posts, watching over the proceedings, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. The air was thick with excitement, but there was an underlying tension as the event was a high-security affair. Among the crowd, an elderly man suddenly collapsed near one of the grand columns. The moment was chaotic, and the guests gasped in alarm. People rushed to the elderly man's side, but in the flurry of activity, it was hard to know what was happening. The music was still playing, and many of the guests were unsure whether the incident was a part of the planned festivities or an emergency. One of the royal guards, Michael, noticed the commotion almost immediately. His training kicked in without hesitation. Without a second thought, he sprinted through the crowd, his heavy boots pounding against the marble floors. As he neared the elderly man, He could see the panicked expressions on the faces of those around him. Michael knelt beside the man, checking for a pulse. It was faint, but still there. Quickly, he assessed the situation, remembering his first aid training from years ago. He called out to someone nearby to fetch medical help, then carefully began administering CPR, gently but firmly pressing on the man's chest. The people who had gathered around the elderly man stepped back, giving Michael room to work. His face remained calm, his movements practiced and assured, despite the urgency of the situation. It was clear to anyone watching that Michael wasn't just acting on instinct. He had been trained for moments like this. Within moments, a few medical personnel rushed to the scene, bringing the necessary equipment to stabilize the elderly man. Michael stepped back as they took over, making sure everything was in order. The crowd was still holding its breath, waiting for the outcome. After a tense minute that felt like an eternity, the medical team managed to stabilize the elderly man, and he was carefully carried away to receive further attention. As the situation calmed down, people began to murmur among themselves. Many were in awe of how quickly and efficiently the Royal Guard had acted. No one had expected that, under the weight of the ceremonial atmosphere, there would be such a sudden shift to a life-or-death situation. But Michael's cool-headedness had made all the difference. Later that day, after the event had ended and the guests had begun to leave, Michael was called into the royal office. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had done his job, and that was all that mattered. The royal family had heard about the incident, and they wanted to express their gratitude. They thanked him for his quick thinking and his calm under pressure. But for Michael, the reward wasn't the praise or the recognition. It was knowing that his training and actions had saved a life. The man who had collapsed at the event was recovering, and that was what mattered most. He had never expected to be in such a situation, but when the moment came, he had been ready. As Michael returned to his post, he felt a deep sense of pride. The world outside had seen only the Royal Guard in uniform, standing tall and unmoving. But in that moment, Michael had proven that even behind the uniform, there was a person capable of more than just standing guard. There was someone who could step in when it mattered most, someone who could protect, care, and make a real difference. It wasn't just about the ceremonial duties. It was about making sure that when the unexpected happened, the guards were always ready to serve, even in the most critical of moments. It was in those moments that their true role was revealed. And for Michael, that was the true reward. A few weeks later, the palace grounds were quiet once again. The grand ceremonies had settled down, and the royal guards returned to their usual routines. The visitors had gone, and the palace returned to its familiar rhythm. But there was something different in the air, something that had subtly shifted within the guards themselves. The small personal acts of kindness and courage they had shown were slowly becoming part of their shared experience, not just isolated moments. It was a cold morning when the royal guards gathered together for their weekly debrief. The usual formalities were taking place, and everyone stood at attention as the commander briefed them on the schedule for the upcoming weeks. However, as the meeting continued, the tone of the room began to change. The commander, usually stern and focused only on the duties at hand, spoke with a different energy. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice firm yet filled with a touch of warmth, "I've been receiving reports from across the palace. It seems that some of you have gone above and beyond the call of duty in ways that go unnoticed by most. I want to take a moment to recognize that." There was a brief pause. The guards exchanged curious glances, unsure of what their commander meant. The mention of above and beyond wasn't something they usually heard in their daily duties. One of the guards, named Ryan, spoke up. "Sir, with all due respect, we do our job to the best of our ability. There's no need for recognition." The commander smiled at Ryan's modesty. "It's true that all of you do your jobs well, but it's not just about standing at your posts or following orders. It's the little things, the respect, the kindness, the compassion, that make a true difference. I've heard about how you've helped people in small but meaningful ways, even when no one was watching. A few guards shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. They hadn't expected praise for doing what they considered to be just basic human decency. "I want to tell you all a story," the commander continued, his voice steady. "Not long ago, a young child approached one of our guards at the gates. This child was curious about the uniform and the ceremony. Instead of ignoring the child or turning away, the guard took the time to answer questions, to engage in a conversation. It may have seemed like nothing at the time, but for that child, it was a moment they will never forget. That guard showed that even in a uniform, we can still be kind and approachable." The room fell silent as the guards thought about their own actions. It wasn't something they had expected to hear, but it was true. They had been showing compassion and respect, not for recognition, but because it felt right. It was part of who they were, whether they were on duty or not. The commander continued, "We often talk about what it means to serve, but sometimes serving means more than protecting the palace walls. It means being there for someone when they least expect it. It means showing respect for those around us, no matter their position or status. It's about showing that we are not just guards, but people who care for others." The guards sat quietly, reflecting on what their commander had said. They had always been proud of their uniforms, proud of the duty they carried. But now they understood something more profound. It wasn't just about the power they represented. It was about the humanity they carried with them, even in the most disciplined of roles. As the meeting wrapped up, the commander dismissed them with a simple but powerful message. "Remember, it's the small moments that matter. The real measure of a guard is not just how they stand in front of the palace, but how they stand with the people they protect." The guards filed out of the room, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The long hours of standing watch, the ceremonies, and the formal duties were all important, but they now knew that it was the quiet, unexpected moments that truly made their role meaningful. They weren't just protecting a palace, they were creating connections, showing respect, and offering kindness to those around them. As they returned to their posts, each guard carried with them a new understanding of what it meant to serve. It was more than just a job. It was about being a part of something greater, a family, a community, and a world where respect and kindness mattered just as much as strength and duty. They stood a little taller, knowing that their actions, no matter how small, were making a real difference in the world around them. As the days passed, the royal guards continued with their duties, standing watch over the palace and performing their ceremonial roles with the same dedication they always had. However, there was a subtle change in the way they viewed their work and their connection to the world around them. They had begun to understand that being a royal guard wasn't just about standing still or following orders. It was about making a real difference, no matter how small or unnoticed the act might seem. One evening, as the sun set over the palace grounds, the guards gathered for a brief moment of rest after their long hours. The usual quietness of the palace was interrupted by the sound of a gentle breeze, and the air was filled with a sense of calm. It had been a long week, filled with events and important gatherings, but the guards had started to realize that the quiet moments were just as important as the grand ceremonies they often attended. William, one of the more experienced guards, sat on a bench outside the palace gates, watching the sky turn a soft shade of orange. He had always found peace in these moments of stillness, away from the crowds and the constant demands of his position. The conversations with his fellow guards had become more relaxed, filled with stories of their families and personal lives, things they had rarely shared before. As he sat there, lost in thought, a young woman approached the gates. She was carrying a basket of food, and it was clear that she had walked quite a distance. She looked tired but determined, her eyes focused on the ground in front of her. When she saw the guards standing at their posts, she hesitated for a moment. William noticed her and stood up, his instincts kicking in. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked kindly, approaching her with a calm and friendly demeanor. The woman looked up, startled by the voice. She smiled weakly. "Yes, thank you. I'm just bringing food to the palace workers. I didn't realize how late it was." William smiled back, sensing that she could use a little help. "I'll walk with you," he said. "The night air can be chilly, and it's a bit of a walk." The young woman seemed surprised, but grateful. "Thank you, I appreciate it." As they walked together toward the workers' quarters, William learned that the woman had been delivering food to the palace staff for years, making sure they had a warm meal after their long shifts. She had never asked for anything in return, but the kindness of her actions had touched many of the palace workers over the years. William admired her dedication to helping others, and as they walked, they talked about the small but meaningful ways people could make a difference in the world. When they reached the workers' quarters, the woman thanked William once again. "I don't usually get help on my deliveries," she said, "but today was different. Thank you for your kindness." William smiled, knowing that the simple act of walking with her had made a bigger impact than she realized. He didn't need to do anything grand or extravagant. All it took was a small gesture of respect, something that allowed him to connect with someone else on a human level. In that moment, he understood that these small acts of kindness, whether it was helping an elderly person, talking to a curious child, or simply walking with someone who needed it, were what truly made his role as a royal guard meaningful. As he turned to return to his post, William realized that he wasn't just standing guard over the palace walls. He was part of something larger, a community where every person, no matter their role, had the ability to show kindness and make a difference. The royal guards had always been symbols of strength and duty, but now they were also symbols of compassion, humility, and respect. It wasn't just about how they stood in front of the palace gates. It was about how they stood beside the people they protected. In the end, the real legacy of a royal guard wasn't in the uniform they wore or the weapons they carried. It was in the quiet moments, the gestures that showed their humanity, their respect for others, and their willingness to make the world a little better, one act of kindness at a time. And that, more than anything, was what made them truly unforgettable.